Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be presenting my paper entitled The Impact of COVID-19 on Garuda Indonesia's Operation. My name is Rizky Multazam Ahmad and I'm currently pursuing my study at Bandung Institute of Technology. Okay, so first we're going to see the presentation overview. So we're going to talk about the introduction, the literature review, the research proposition, methodology, findings, and conclusion. So first is about the introduction. COVID-19 is a worldwide pandemic that greatly affects the way people interact with one another. So this pandemic prevents people from meeting face-to-face. It has a tremendous impact on businesses as well, as many businesses started to collapse and declare bankruptcy. So due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been some changes related to people's concerns, especially towards the safeness of using public transportation. So people started to prioritize the main concern of health, hygiene, as well as their safety, and it is not necessarily easy for companies to regain trust so that people would start to use this particular mode of transportation again. However, this has a major impact on the operational activities of airline companies. So Garuda Indonesia is one of the airlines from Indonesia that is still running today. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, many impacts affect the company's performance, particularly in the operation, which opens up the possibility of bankruptcy. It is certainly challenging for the company to adapt and survive, seeing many new policies and restrictions emerge. So this brings the question, how has the COVID-19 pandemic, in the form of new policies and restrictions, affected patterns of operational activities of Garuda Indonesia? So given the background as to why this issue is critical, the research objective is to identify every factor that correlates to the COVID-19 pandemic in the form of new policies and restrictions that threatens the company's operation. So Garuda Indonesia has multiple aircraft fleets that are being used for its activities, but mainly Boeing 737 airplanes. Therefore, the research is focusing more on the Boeing 737 fleet. So next we're going to talk about the literature review. So first, operation management. Some researchers have defined operation management as the administration of systems or process that are used to deliver services. It includes the planning, organizing, coordinating, and regulating all of the resources required to manufacture a company's goods or services. It includes the management of people, equipment, technology, information, and all other resources as well. As for the aviation industry, so one of the industries that consider operation is the aviation industry. Operation in this industry include a lot of things, but the definition of the aviation industry mentioned in this paper is narrowed down into commercial flight activities in airports. So this industry deals with some complex operations as it includes the airport, aircrafts, airlines, customers, crews, and a lot more others. As for from the literature review, the researcher has made a proposition that the COVID-19 pandemic, in the form of new policies and restrictions, is severely affecting patterns of operational activities in Garuda Indonesia. So now we're moving on to the methodology. So the researcher is using the qualitative approach by using interpretivism through the abduction approach, considering the dynamic and changing nature of operation. So the research process begins with an incomplete set of observation with the encounter of a phenomena, which is the pandemic. Then the researcher would compare the observation with the data from the source and generate a probable conclusion from what the researcher has found. As for the data collection method, for the time horizon, the study is carried out both longitudinally and in cross-sectional. So the document analysis will be carried out in 1 year period of time before and during this pandemic, which is from 2019 to 2020. So this will provide a snapshot of differences between the two situations and focus on the effect, hence the presence of the time interval. So shown on previous studies, this type of analysis is relevant for the context of the COVID-19 impacting business, as it provides detailed factual data. So the document from before and during the pandemic will be compared to conclude the effects of COVID-19 pandemic on Garuda Indonesia's operation. However, the interview will be a type of observational study that analyzes data from the source at a specific point in time, which is during the pandemic. So this interview discussed other potential aspects that are not covered in the documents, see the perspective of the business itself, and also answer the research question. So the interview was conducted with the chief pilot of Boeing 737 fleet, Captain Ahmad. So he is in charge of the operational activities of the Boeing 737 fleet as a subordinate of the VP Flight Operation under the Director of Operation. As Captain Ahmad has been working with the company for more than 20 years, he is able to provide the necessary information needed for the research. And for the data analysis, by using the interview and document analysis, the researcher is trying to find and point out the difference between Garuda Indonesia's operation before and after the COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, the comparison method is relevant and can answer the research question. So next is we're going to talk about the findings. So COVID-19 has a tremendous effect on Garuda Indonesia. As quoted from the interviewee, yes, indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic has been affecting the company severely. So the number of passengers had fallen dramatically in several months in 2020, shown by the data obtained from the International Air Transport Association. So from the two different periods, there was a decrease in the number of passengers by 45%, from 5,658 million passengers in January to April 2019 to 3,138 million passengers in January to April 2020. And from the interview with the chief pilot of Boeing 737 fleet, Captain Ahmad, there are several impacts caused by the COVID-19 pandemic on Garuda Indonesia's operations. Some patterns include the decrease of flight activities, the number of planes, the number of passengers, the number of crews, and the company's debts, the government aid, as well as the future strategy. So first of all, we're going to dig deeper into these flight activities. So the presence of the airline is still considered essential in Indonesia. Although it is essential, the decrease during the peak of the pandemic was dramatic. Flight frequency for Garuda Indonesia before COVID-19 was 300 to 400 flights per day. During the peak of COVID-19, the frequency was drastically reduced to 70 to 100 flights per day. There was once where the flight activities only reached 50 flights per day. And next is about the number of passengers. So Garuda Indonesia relies heavily on the government, as the company is considered state-owned enterprise. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the government implemented some regulations and restrictions related to people's traveling activities. And due to these issues, the number of passengers also decreased from 50,000 passengers per day before the pandemic to best case scenario only 15,000 passengers per day. Not to mention it could only reach 700 to 900 passengers per day during the peak of the pandemic. So next we're going to talk about the number of airplanes. So right before the pandemic, in the Boeing 737 fleet, Garuda Indonesia had 73 aircraft of the Boeing 737-800 NG model and one aircraft of the Boeing 737 MAX model. And after the pandemic hit, 36 aircraft of Boeing 737 NG were sent back to the lessors because of the problems related to contract as well as debts. There are now 737 aircraft of Boeing 737 NG and one aircraft of Boeing 737 MAX yet left. Even though the company still has several Boeing 737 aircrafts, some of them are unavailable and grounded either by lessors or by maintenance. So these leaves them with just 20 to 25 aircrafts. So next is about the number of crews. So at first, Garuda Indonesia had 1,200 pilots, but as the number of aircrafts decreased, plenty of pilots become less productive. This clearly becomes a problem. The company then slowly decreased the number of pilots through several ways. Firstly, the opera-age pilots and the contracted pilots are laid off from working. But even after the implementation of this policy, the number was not enough. The next effort is the early retirement program. So this program was offered to pilots that were not yet in the range of retirement age, and yet it was still not enough. And the company then carried out another alternative, which was the unpaid leave programs for pilots. In this program, pilots would work alternatively in this substitutes with some other pilots, meaning that some pilots would work in even months and some other would work in odd months. But during the free months, they would not get paid. So this program was aimed to be a good alternative and ease the burden of the company as well as the employees, as they are not required to stop working. And it turned out that this program helped the company survive the downside, and this program is, as of now, still being carried out. So next is about the company's debts. So as the number of passengers decreases, so does the company's profitability. So the company has been having difficulties paying their debts to the lessors, making some of the aircrafts need to be grounded for a while. Another thing that is making it worse is that the cost of leasing the aircrafts is not adequately affordable, as there were some policies implemented since the beginning of the contract in the past. So the price is currently above the market price, and it certainly adds more burden to the company. So next is about the government aid and future strategy. So Garuda Indonesia nearly went bankrupt, but its historical values and legacy as the international flight carrier play a significant role in helping the company survive. The company then considered the efforts to save the airline by providing some help. The government then considered the effort to providing some help. The problem started when Garuda Indonesia was unable to pay the debts to the lessors and asked for help from the government. So the government was able to provide loans for the company for the amount of 8.5 trillion rupiahs, but at first the government was only able to provide 1 trillion rupiahs due to some unexpected reasons. So the CEO of Garuda Indonesia then took an approach involving the postponement of debt payment obligation. This alternative is intended to avoid bankruptcy by giving the company the opportunity to continue their business without any pressure from creditors and develop their business. So this approach would end up in two possibilities. It's either the lessors agree and Garuda continues operating, or the lessors disagree, which results in bankruptcy for Garuda Indonesia. So this approach is still in process until now. Garuda Indonesia is now trying to develop strategy for its future operation. The company will make sure to optimize the operation with the remaining routes and aircrafts with the ideal number of employees. So as for the conclusion, according to the findings in the previous section, the COVID-19 pandemic in the form of new policies and restrictions has severely affected patterns of operational activities in Garuda Indonesia. Several regulations, including the shutdown of some airports, the constraint on capacity and the complexity of the administration procedures, and the new health law present significant challenges for the company. Additionally, there was a drop in flight operations. Aircraft were reduced, leaving only 50% of its initial quantity. Passengers were also reduced. The worst was less than 1,000 passengers per day. And lastly, the implementation of new policies was carried out related to companies' debts, employees, government subsidies, and its future strategy. As the government regulations started to become normal, no test requirement and capacity limitation, the flight activity is no longer affected. However, the profitability is still affected because of the limited resources, including the aircrafts. That is why the most reasonable strategy for the company is to make use of the remaining resources to keep recovering. So this is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for the attention and stay safe.